Since the start of the war in Ukraine, many experts have speculated that U.S. assistance could greatly impact our own munitions stockpiles. But White House and defense officials say that's not the case. John Ferrari is a non-resident senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute. He's also a former director of program analysis and evaluation for the Army. John, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
So do you believe that's true, that U.S. Munitions stockpiles will be negatively impacted?
Yes, that's absolutely true. We know with javelins and stingers, right, we've put in a third of the global stockpile just into Ukraine. And so we know it'll take about 3 years. And this isn't the first time this has happened. It happened in 2014 in the war in Syria, where the Air Force blew through its global stockpile fighting ISIS. So this is now a recurring item when there's a regional war.
So you say that the most important step the Pentagon can take is to set realistic stockpile requirements. Why are they not realistic, and what do they need to be?
So they're not realistic because in many ways the stockpile requirements are set by what the Pentagon thinks it can afford. So a few years back it went to a one-war scenario because that was what we thought we could afford budget-wise. And so what happens then is you draw down the stockpiles and you can't fight another war, and adversaries can take advantage of you. Really what's needed is a two-war strategy of stockpiles and long wars, because right now the assumptions are for short wars. And we see in Ukraine as it drags on, the stockpiles and even the weapons take long to replace, and they don't even account for attrition of weapon systems. And so the other thing that the Pentagon needs to do is to really take into account what allies need, because we are the global supplier of these munitions. And so when allies go to war with us and we have to supply them, they also eat into our stockpile. So we need to account for all of that.
And you also suggest setting up a way for allies to contribute money to our stockpile.
Yeah, in many ways, right? If we could build an ally stockpile and everybody buys in like an insurance policy and then they can draw out when they need it, everybody shares the burden.
Another recommendation is to eliminate indefinite delivery, indefinite quantity. It's called IDIQ contracts with the munitions sector. What does that mean and how would it work?
So those type of contracts essentially allow the government to say, hey, whenever I need munitions, I'll call you and send money and yell surprise, and then you'll produce it. But there's a long supply chain, as we see, 3 years. Instead, what we should be doing is doing 5-year block buys, where we say, these are the munitions we need over the next 5 years. We're going to contract for them. And then industry and Wall Street will put up money to get the supply chains going. And if they can produce them faster and make more money, they will, and that's better for everybody. So what we need is to go away from these yelling surprise and instead, put money on the table in 5-year block buys.
You also say that the Pentagon needs to change the way it operates its munition production facilities. Explain that.
So the government actually owns many of the production facilities, and they operate them like military installations, but contractors then run them, places like Radford Munitions Plant. Well, the government runs it. It's got a fire department, a police department, and all sorts of government and security requirements. It forces those contracts that are making it to bake the price of those services into the price of the munition. And so the munition prices go up, and then you distort the marketplace, right? In our capitalist society, price determines supply and demand. And the government is forcing the price and distorting it. So what needs to happen is the government just needs to pay for those things that the government requires, and then allow the price of the munition really to reflect what it costs to manufacture the munition.
What is contracting to monopoly?
So look at the Joint Strike Fighter. We used to have a very robust fighter market. We had 3 or 4 companies that made fighter jets, and then we went with the Joint Strike Fighter, and we went to one company, and all the other companies went away. And we say we don't like monopolies because of all the problems with them, but the government creates monopolies by going with the most efficient contractor and going with one. The government has experimented in the munitions market with the medium caliber munitions where it contracts for 2 contractors to run, and it splits the buys. Now, it's a little more expensive in the short term, but in the long term, you have 2 suppliers who can compete against each other and keep the supply chains going. And so we have to stop this contracting to monopoly and instead keep a robust supply base by having multiple suppliers out there.
You say this, quote, very little in war is more problematic than running out of bullets. I can definitely see that. So why haven't these changes been made?
So money. And, that right now the current defense strategy assumes we'll take risk. It's a divest to invest strategy, which means stop buying things now and we'll buy them in the future. We'll do research and development. During the Reagan buildup, we spent $2.5 for every dollar we did in research and development. The 23 budget had $1.1. So essentially, the government has stopped the buying items. And so what we suggest is no, right? Buy, right? That's how you solve your supply chain. You've got to put money against the problem, and you've got to buy.
All right, but how much is this going to cost? Give me actual dollars.
So, you know, across the board, not just munitions, but all weapon systems, the government could easily take $45 billion out of research and development, which is the amount of money they've increased since 2017, and just put it into procurement. And that would put that ratio. And you could easily then, out of that $45 billion, without any additional appropriations from Congress, right, over 5 years, that's an extra $250 billion going into procurement, and you could rebuild those stockpiles pretty quickly.
But I can hear the R&D community right now saying, what, are you kidding me? Take it away from R&D? Then that's going to harm the future.
Well, I don't think so, because, right, that R&D money, when you take that $45 billion away, that puts R&D funding levels where they were in 2017. So this is a relatively recent phenomenon where we've gone all in under the what I think is the wrong theory of, hey, we can take risk this decade, that the 2020s, the Russians and Chinese are in a threat, and instead prepare for the 2030s. What we know today is the Russians are a threat and the Chinese are a threat, right? We've talked now about China being a threat by 2027. So the question is, are you willing to gamble with war this decade to prepare for war next decade?
All right, well, that's the question. John, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you very much.